The hunt begins. The alien arena was built high above the surface of a barren world, its steel walls stretching upward like the ribs of a colossal beast. Rows upon rows of spectators filled the seats, their voices echoing in 1,000 tongues, a mixture of cruel laughter and mocking chants. Today they had gathered for entertainment, for blood, for the spectacle of watching a human perish in the jaws of their most prized creature. To them it was not a trial but a joke, a performance meant to humiliate a species they considered weak. At the center of the arena stood a single figure, a human soldier named Marcus Hale, stripped of his weapons and armor. Chains had only recently been removed from his wrists, leaving red marks on his skin, yet his eyes were steady and cold. He did not look at the crowd or bow his head in fear. Instead, he scanned the sand beneath his boots, the walls around him, the heavy gates on the far side. He breathed slowly as if preparing himself for something inevitable. The alien overseer, tall and skeletal with glimmering eyes, raised a hand to silence the crowd. His voice carried through amplifiers, sharp and cruel, announcing that a new demonstration was about to begin. He declared that the human would now face the galaxy's most fearsome apex predator, a beast so deadly that even seasoned warriors dared not challenge it alone. The audience roared in delight, their bodies trembling with excitement. They expected screams, panic, a swift and bloody end. Marcus lifted his head and stared at the gate where the predator would emerge. He felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, waiting for him to break. But inside his chest there was no fear, only a heavy calm. He remembered the lessons drilled into him since his youth. Observe, adapt, survive. Fear clouds judgment, but clarity wins battles. He tightened his fists, not as a display of rage, but as a reminder that his body itself was still a weapon. The gate began to rumble. Metal scraped against stone as gears turned, and the sound of chains clattering filled the arena. From the shadows behind the bars came a low growl, deep and guttural like thunder rolling through a cavern. The crowd grew louder, some stamping their feet, others leaning forward with wide eyes, eager to see the human torn apart. The gate lifted higher and the creature stepped into the light. It was massive, taller than 3 men, with black scales that shimmered under the artificial sun. Its head was crowned with jagged horns, its mouth lined with rows of serrated teeth that dripped saliva thick as oil. Forelimbs as thick as tree trunks carried its weight, and each step shook the sand. Its tail lashed behind it, spiked and heavy, leaving deep scars in the ground. This was no simple animal, but a predator shaped by a death-world ecosystem to be relentless, cunning, and merciless. To the aliens it was entertainment, but to Marcus it was a challenge that demanded every ounce of his will. The creature sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring as it locked onto the scent of human flesh. It lowered its head and growled again, the sound vibrating in Marcus's bones. Yet he did not move backward, he did not scream or tremble. He planted his feet firmly and raised his arms slightly, adopting a stance that spoke of readiness. He studied the predator's muscles, the way its eyes tracked him, the rhythm of its breathing. Every detail mattered because in those details lay the path to survival. The crowd jeered, calling him foolish, some mocking him by mimicking his stance. They laughed as if he were a clown dancing before certain death. But among them, a few began to notice something strange. The human's posture was not of a prey animal about to run. It was of a hunter waiting for the right moment to strike. The predator advanced, its claws digging trenches into the ground, its shadow stretching over Marcus like a storm. The air thickened with the stench of its body, the sound of its breathing, the heavy scrape of its claws. Still, Marcus did not retreat. He moved only when the creature lunged, its jaws snapping shut inches from where he had stood a heartbeat before. He rolled across the sand and rose smoothly, his eyes never leaving the beast. The crowd gasped in surprise, not expecting such agility. The overseer frowned, displeased. This was not how the story was meant to go. The human should have been bleeding already, screaming in terror, but instead he had moved with precision, dodging death in a way that made it look almost effortless. Marcus steadied his breathing, his chest rising and falling with control. He had seen the power in the creature's strike, the speed hidden in its massive frame, but he had also seen the moment it shifted its weight, the brief window when its balance could be tested. That was knowledge, and knowledge was a weapon. He flexed his hands, feeling the coarse sand stick to his skin. He had no blades, no gun, but he had his body, his mind, and the determination that had carried humans across countless battles and death worlds of their own. The predator snarled and prepared to strike again, its muscles tensing like coiled steel. The crowd held its breath, expecting the end, but Marcus's eyes burned with focus. He whispered to himself words no one else could hear. Survive, adapt, overcome. He was not prey, and soon the galaxy would understand that. Predator meets prey. The arena floor trembled as the predator circled Marcus, its massive tail whipping back and forth with the force of a battering ram. Dust swirled in the air, coating the hot sand in a haze that shimmered under the artificial sunlight. The alien audience leaned forward in their seats, anticipation building as they waited for the inevitable clash. Their eyes glistened with malice, their voices dripping with mockery as they shouted wagers and insults, each convinced that the human would soon be reduced to broken pieces. Yet their laughter grew uneasy as they saw Marcus still standing strong, his body tense but unbroken, his eyes locked on the monster before him. The predator lowered its head, horns scraping the sand as it let out a roar so loud that the walls of the arena shook. The sound rattled bones and vibrated through the ground, making some of the smaller alien spectators cover their ears. Marcus did not flinch. He had heard worse in the chaos of war, the crash of artillery, the cries of dying men. This was a different battlefield, but the rules were the same. Read the enemy, exploit its weaknesses, endure until it fell. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, his focus narrowing until the entire world seemed to shrink into the space between himself and the beast. The creature lunged with terrifying speed, its front limbs striking down like hammers, claws carving through the sand. Marcus dodged left, rolling clear as the ground erupted where he had stood. A storm of dust and debris filled the air, and through it came the predator's snapping jaws, rows of teeth glistening with venomous saliva. Marcus slid under its gaping maw, his body moving with trained precision, and slammed his fist against the underside of its jaw. The strike was nothing compared to the beast's strength, but it shocked the crowd to see him attack at all. The predator reeled back more in surprise than pain, its golden eyes narrowing as it reassessed this strange prey that dared to fight back. The aliens erupted in laughter again, mocking the human for striking with bare fists against such a monster. Yet behind the laughter there was a thin edge of doubt, for the human was still alive, still moving, and the predator had missed twice. That alone was unusual. No victim had lasted this long without being mauled. The overseer's skeletal face darkened as he watched the battle unfold, displeasure etched into every movement of his thin lips. Marcus did not give them time to mock for long. He sprinted across the arena, keeping distance, forcing the predator to chase him rather than allowing it to dictate the fight. He knew he could not match its raw strength head-on, but speed, agility, and endurance were weapons in their own right. The predator snarled and lunged again, its jaws snapping inches from his shoulder. He dove aside, rolled, and came up behind it, his eyes scanning the ridges of scales that armored its back. Thick, nearly impenetrable, but in between those scales were softer joints, thin seams of vulnerable flesh. That was where he would need to strike. The beast roared and spun, its tail whipping toward him like a massive club. Marcus braced and leapt backward, the tail missing his legs by a breath and smashing into the arena wall with such force that cracks spiderwebbed across the stone. Dust rained down from above, and several aliens in the front rows recoiled in shock. They had seen that tail shatter steel cages, crush armored beasts, but the human had avoided it with reflexes that should have been impossible. The predator's breathing grew louder, hot and heavy, filling the air with its rancid stench. It circled again, more cautious now, its yellow eyes narrowing with predatory intelligence. This was not the usual slaughter it was accustomed to, not the easy tearing of weak flesh. This prey was different. This prey had teeth. Marcus crouched low, sweat rolling down his forehead and stinging his eyes, yet his focus did not break. He could feel the strain in his muscles, the sting of shallow cuts from the sand and the beast's near misses. But pain was familiar, an old companion he had learned to embrace. Pain meant he was still alive, still in the fight. He dragged in a breath and reminded himself of every battle he had endured before, every impossible situation where survival seemed laughable. Humanity had always been underestimated, and again, here in this alien arena, that mistake would cost them. The beast lunged once more, this time with a deceptive feint, swiping with one claw while keeping its massive head reared back, waiting for him to dodge in the wrong direction. But Marcus recognized the trick, saw the shift in its stance, the tightening of its hind legs. He dove forward instead of sideways, sliding under its chest, his hands scraping against rough scales as he rolled clear on the other side. He rose to his feet in one motion and drove a sharp kick into the softer flesh of its rear leg joint. The predator roared in pain, stumbling slightly, and the crowd erupted into a cacophony of disbelief. The overseer slammed a bony fist against the railing in frustration. This was not entertainment anymore. This was a spectacle that undermined their mockery of humanity. The human was supposed to die, yet instead he was exposing cracks in their greatest weapon. The crowd's laughter had grown quieter now, replaced by whispers and uneasy murmurs. Marcus stared at the beast as it turned toward him again, fury burning in its glowing eyes. He wiped blood from a shallow cut on his arm and whispered to himself with a voice steady and firm. He knew the fight had only begun, but the truth was already clear. The predator had expected prey. What it faced instead was a soldier who refused to yield. First clash of beasts. The arena was silent for a moment after the predator stumbled from Marcus's strike, the crowd frozen in disbelief at what they had just seen. This was not supposed to happen. The beast had been undefeated for years, a living weapon used to break prisoners and humiliate other species. Yet here was a human unarmed and alone, driving his foot into its joints and making it falter. The silence broke into a wave of shouting, laughter mixed with outrage, the aliens unable to decide whether this was comedy or an insult to their pride. The overseer glared down from his elevated throne, skeletal fingers clenching the armrests as his yellow eyes burned with fury. He had promised the crowd a swift kill, a spectacle of dominance, but now he was forced to watch as the human continued to survive. The predator shook itself, snarling in rage, its spiked tail carving deep trenches in the sand as it whipped back and forth. The sound of its roar shook the stands, a thunderous call that reverberated in every chest. It charged with renewed ferocity, its claws digging deep into the ground as it launched itself forward like a tidal wave of scales and muscle. Marcus stood his ground until the last moment before sidestepping with a sudden burst of speed. The predator's momentum carried it past him, and Marcus slammed his elbow into its rib as it thundered by. The strike would not kill, but it added to the beast's frustration, and frustration could lead to mistakes. The audience roared with disbelief. They had seen prey flee and they had seen prey be torn apart, but they had never seen prey strike back again and again. To them, the human was supposed to be fragile, a weak animal from a lowly world. Yet this man fought like a cornered predator himself, his every move calculated and his every strike purposeful. Whispers spread among the crowd, some insisting that this must be staged, others watching with dawning fear. The predator turned again, its golden eyes glowing with hatred, and this time it attacked with both claws and teeth, striking in rapid succession. Marcus ducked under a sweeping claw and rolled away from the snapping jaws. But the second claw came faster than he anticipated, raking across his side. Blood burst from the shallow wound, painting the sand red as pain lanced through his ribs. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay upright, ignoring the heat of agony spreading through his body. Pain was not defeat. Pain was proof that he was still alive, still fighting. He tightened his stance and forced his breathing into rhythm again. The beast roared at the sight of blood, its hunger and rage ignited. It lunged once more, and Marcus met its charge head-on this time. He leapt forward, planting both hands on the monster's horned snout, and vaulted himself upward. His body soared over its snapping jaws, and he landed on the creature's back, gripping the ridges of its scales. The crowd gasped, 1,000 voices crying out in disbelief as the human rode the predator like a beast of war. The creature thrashed wildly, slamming its body against the walls of the arena, trying to dislodge him. Marcus held on, his muscles screaming with effort, his hands raw from the jagged scales cutting into his skin. He raised his fist and drove it into the thinner seam of flesh between two scales on its neck. The predator bellowed in pain, its roar shaking the very stones of the arena, and it reared up on its hind legs in fury. Marcus hammered another strike, then another, feeling the warm spurt of blood beneath his knuckles. The alien spectators could not comprehend what they were seeing. To them, the predator was invincible, yet a human, a creature they dismissed as primitive, was drawing blood with nothing but fists. The predator slammed itself against the ground, rolling in desperation to crush him. Marcus released his grip at the last second, leaping clear as the monster's bulk slammed into the sand. He landed hard, his lungs burning, but he forced himself to rise, standing tall with his chest heaving. His face was streaked with dirt, sweat, and blood, yet his eyes still burned with focus. The crowd's laughter had stopped now. In its place came a low murmur, a ripple of unease that spread from row to row. They had never seen such defiance, such raw endurance. The overseer leaned forward, his skeletal hands clenching tighter, his sharp teeth grinding together. He had thought this battle would prove the weakness of humanity, but instead it was proving the opposite. This human was demonstrating that their species did not break under fear, that they did not run when hunted. They fought with everything they had, and they fought until the end. The predator rose again, its chest heaving with fury, its blood dripping onto the sand. It stared at Marcus with a hatred so intense that even the alien spectators shivered. Marcus stared back, shoulders squared, fists clenched, body trembling with exhaustion but spirit unbroken. For a moment the two locked eyes across the battlefield. Predator and prey, hunter and survivor. And something passed between them. The predator recognized that this fight would not be easy, that this prey was not like the others. And Marcus recognized that to survive he would need to push beyond every limit he had ever known. The silence stretched across the arena until finally the predator let out another roar and charged again. Sand spraying in every direction. Marcus dropped into a low stance, ready to meet it once more. The first clash was over, but the true battle was only just beginning. The shocking turn, the predator thundered across the arena, its claws tearing deep furrows into the sand as its massive bulk moved with terrifying speed. Each step shook the ground like an earthquake, the rumble echoing through the bones of every creature in the stands. The alien audience screamed in delight at the renewed charge, convinced that the human could not possibly withstand the storm that was coming. Yet mixed with their roars of excitement was an uneasy note. The memory of what had already been witnessed, the sight of a fragile human drawing blood from their most feared beast. Marcus stood his ground, sweat dripping into his eyes, his body trembling from pain and exhaustion. But his spirit hardened with a resolve that would not break. When the predator lunged with its snapping jaws, Marcus dove to the side, rolling clear of the strike. But instead of retreating, he twisted and came up under the arc of its attack. He drove his shoulder into its chest with all the strength he could muster, forcing its momentum off balance. The beast stumbled a step, surprised by the defiance of prey that refused to flee. The crowd gasped, the sound rippling across the stands like a shockwave. They had seen prisoners dodge before. They had even seen them make desperate attempts to fight, but this was something else entirely. The human was not just reacting, he was forcing the predator to adapt. The overseer gritted his teeth as he leaned forward, thin skeletal fingers tapping the railing. His golden eyes narrowed with fury as he watched the predator's hesitation. This fight was no longer the simple demonstration he had promised. It was turning into something dangerous, something that could shift how his people viewed humanity. Marcus steadied his breathing, ignoring the burning pain in his side from the earlier wound. He could not think of the pain. He could only think of the next move, the next breath, the next opportunity. He studied the way the beast's chest rose and fell, the way its hind legs dug into the sand before each charge, the flicker of its tail when it prepared to strike. Patterns revealed themselves in every detail, and patterns could be exploited. The predator lashed out with its tail, a blur of spikes and raw power. Marcus ducked and rolled forward, closing the distance instead of retreating, his hands reaching for the ridges of scales along its leg. With a grunt of effort, he slammed his fist into the softer flesh beneath its knee joint. The beast bellowed in agony, stumbling as its leg buckled under the force. The crowd erupted in chaos, their voices clashing in disbelief and anger. To see their greatest predator falter against a bare-handed human shook them in ways they did not want to admit. The predator, enraged, swung its head down and snapped its jaws toward Marcus. He barely leapt aside in time, feeling the rush of hot breath and the sting of saliva against his skin. The monster's teeth clamped shut with a sound like shattering stone, inches from his body. He landed in the sand, rolling back to his feet with a speed born not from strength but from survival. His chest heaved, his body ached, but his mind was sharp and focused. He could not let the beast regain control. He had to keep it off balance, keep pressing until it made the mistake he needed. The beast shook its head, blood dripping from the wounds Marcus had already inflicted, and its eyes burned with a fury that no words could capture. It charged again, but this time Marcus ran toward it instead of away. The crowd screamed, thinking the human had finally lost his mind, that he was throwing himself into certain death. But Marcus had seen what they had not. The brief hitch in the predator's stride from the injured joint, the slight stagger that revealed weakness. He slid beneath its chest as it lunged, sand scraping his skin raw, and with every ounce of strength left in his body, he drove his fists into its exposed underside. The beast roared in pain, thrashing wildly, but Marcus rolled clear just in time to avoid being crushed by its massive body. He rose to his feet again, blood dripping from his knuckles, his body battered but his spirit blazing brighter than ever. The alien crowd stared in stunned silence, their laughter gone, replaced by a tension that clung to the air like smoke. The overseer slammed his hand against the railing, furious now. The human should not still be alive. The human should not still be fighting. Yet here he stood, forcing their beast into a struggle it had never known before. The overseer could see the fear spreading through the audience. The realization that perhaps humanity was not weak at all, that perhaps the galaxy had been wrong to treat them as prey. Marcus lifted his head and glared at the beast. His chest heaving, his eyes locked with its glowing gaze. He was bleeding, exhausted, nearly broken, but he was still alive, and that simple fact was tearing down everything the aliens believed. He clenched his fists again, whispering to himself words no one else could hear, words that gave him strength. He knew the fight was not over. The beast would rise again, angrier than before, but he also knew that it could be hurt, that it could bleed, and if it could bleed, then it could die. The predator let out another roar, louder and more furious than all before, and the sound rattled the walls of the arena. It lowered its head, muscles coiled for one final devastating charge. The aliens in the stands leaned forward, some desperate to see the end, others silently praying for the impossible. Marcus stood tall, blood running down his arms, eyes fixed on the oncoming storm. This was no longer prey-facing predator. This was a clash of beasts, and only one would walk away. The apex predator falls. The arena shook as the predator thundered forward, each step throwing sand into the air and rattling the stands. Its roar was a storm of fury and pain, a sound that made even the hardened aliens flinch in their seats. For years it had been their instrument of terror, their champion, the monster that crushed anything unlucky enough to face it. Yet now it bore wounds dripping blood onto the sand, wounds inflicted not by another beast or advanced weapons, but by a single unarmed human who refused to bow to fear. The spectators could not look away, their jeers replaced by a heavy silence, their eyes fixed on the impossible clash unfolding before them. Marcus stood ready, his chest heaving with the strain of battle, his fists clenched though his knuckles were split and bleeding. His ribs ached from the strike he had taken earlier, his vision blurred at the edges from exhaustion, but his focus was sharp and unwavering. He had reached the point where every breath tasted of iron, every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but he did not retreat. He was a soldier of Earth, forged by struggle and hardened by the will to endure. The predator charged with the speed of a landslide, but Marcus did not back down. He waited for the moment, the tiny flicker of weakness that he had seen earlier when the beast's leg faltered. The clash came like thunder. The predator lunged with jaws wide, teeth glistening with venomous saliva, but Marcus dove aside at the last instant, rolling across the sand and springing up with a burst of energy that seemed impossible for a man so battered. He swung his fist into the wounded joint of its rear leg once again, and the creature stumbled, its massive body collapsing into the sand with a roar of agony. The crowd gasped, their disbelief echoing across the stands, 1,000 voices crying out in shock. Their beast had fallen to its knees, its golden eyes wide with rage and fear. Marcus did not hesitate. He sprinted toward its head, sand spraying behind him, his body moving faster than his injuries should have allowed. The predator swung its spiked tail in desperation, a blur of deadly power. But Marcus dove under it, the spikes missing his back by a hair's breadth. He came up against the side of the beast's neck, his hand searching for the gap between its armored scales. He found the seam, soft and vulnerable, and with a roar of his own he drove his fists into it again and again, each strike fueled by every ounce of strength left in his body. Blood spurted from the wound, hot and dark, spraying across his arms and chest. The predator shrieked in pain, thrashing wildly, but Marcus clung to its neck, refusing to let go. The overseer shouted in fury, his skeletal form trembling as he slammed his hand against the railing, but his voice was lost in the uproar of the crowd. They were no longer laughing. They were no longer mocking. They were witnessing something they could not understand, something that defied everything they believed about the balance between predator and prey. The human was supposed to be weak, yet here he was, breaking their monster with nothing but will and raw strength. The predator tried to throw Marcus off, slamming its body against the ground and rolling violently, but Marcus held on, his fingers digging into the ridges of its scales. His teeth gritted against the impact, His body screamed with agony, but his mind refused to surrender. He struck again, his fists sinking deeper into the wound, tearing flesh apart with sheer determination. The beast roared and twisted, its movements growing weaker as blood poured onto the sand in rivers. At last, Marcus seized one of the jagged scales and ripped it free, his muscles burning as he tore the natural blade from the predator's body. With the shard clutched in his hand, he drove it down into the soft gap of its throat with a cry that echoed across the arena. The scale plunged deep, cutting through muscle and vein, and the predator convulsed, its massive frame shuddering as life began to leave its body. Marcus stabbed again and again, each strike deeper than the last, until the beast's roars turned into gurgles and then into silence. The arena was still. The predator collapsed onto the sand, its body shaking once before it lay motionless, blood pooling around it. Marcus rose slowly from its neck, his chest heaving, his body drenched in sweat and blood, his arms trembling from exhaustion. He stood atop the carcass of the galaxy's greatest predator, his eyes scanning the silent crowd. Not a word was spoken, not a laugh or a jeer. The aliens stared in stunned silence, their minds struggling to comprehend what they had seen. Marcus ripped the shard of scale from the creature's throat and raised it high, his body swaying but his spirit unbroken. The gesture was not one of arrogance but of survival, a declaration that humanity was not prey. The silence broke into whispers, then into shouts of fear and disbelief, the crowd struggling to reconcile what their eyes told them with what their beliefs insisted was impossible. The overseer sank back into his throne, his skeletal face pale, his golden eyes filled with a fear he could not hide. Marcus stepped down from the predator's corpse, his legs nearly buckling under him. Yet he walked with his head high. Each step left a trail of bloody footprints in the sand, proof of the impossible victory he had just claimed. He did not look at the overseer or the aliens who had mocked him. He looked only ahead, each breath carrying him closer to freedom. The galaxy had thought humans weak, fragile, laughable. Today they had seen the truth, and the truth was written in the carcass of their champion. Humanity was dangerous, and the galaxy would never forget this day. The human stands victorious. The arena stank of blood and dust, the sand soaked dark where the predator's lifeblood had spilled. Its corpse stretched across the battlefield, massive and broken, a monument to the impossible feat that had just unfolded before the eyes of thousands. The alien spectators sat frozen in their seats, their earlier jeers and laughter now smothered into silence. Their champion, the undefeated apex predator, the beast they had trusted to crush countless victims, lay lifeless at the feet of a single human soldier. It was a sight that tore at the very core of their beliefs, a sight that no alien in the stands could easily accept. Marcus stood with his chest heaving, every breath heavy with exhaustion, his body trembling from the effort of survival. Blood ran down his arms, both his own and the predator's, dripping into the sand with steady rhythm. His clothes were torn, his skin cut and bruised, but his stance was firm. He was alive. Against every expectation, against every prediction of failure, he was the one still standing while the monster that had been called invincible was not. He lifted his head and scanned the crowd, his sharp eyes locking onto faces that had once been twisted with mockery, but now were pale with fear. For the first time, the galaxy was beginning to understand what it meant to face a human. They had thought humans were soft, weak, fragile prey that could be bent and broken. Yet this lone soldier had proven otherwise. He had endured pain that would have driven most to collapse, had fought without weapons against a predator bred only for destruction, and had won. His victory was not just survival. It was a declaration. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was something far more dangerous. The overseer on his throne clenched the railing so tightly his bony fingers cracked against the metal. His golden eyes burned with rage, but beneath that rage was fear. He had orchestrated this spectacle to humiliate humans, to remind the galaxy of their supposed place at the bottom of the chain, but instead he had unleashed a truth he could not contain. The crowd had witnessed the impossible. The truth would spread. No matter how much he tried to silence it, this victory would become a story whispered across stars. Marcus stumbled forward and placed a hand on the carcass of the predator, steadying himself against its cold scales. His body screamed for rest, his muscles torn and battered, but his spirit would not allow him to fall. He had been trained to fight until there was no breath left in his chest, and that training, that relentless human drive, had carried him to this moment. Slowly, deliberately, he climbed onto the body of the beast, rising above it until he stood on its neck, his figure framed against the artificial sunlight that shone down into the arena. The image struck the aliens harder than any words could. A lone human, bloodied and battered but unbroken, standing tall over the corpse of the creature they had feared and worshipped as the ultimate predator. It was a symbol, a message written in blood and defiance. It told them that humans were not weak, that humans were not prey, that humans could stand against anything the galaxy could throw at them and emerge victorious. The crowd's silence broke into murmurs, then into panicked cries. Some shouted that it was impossible. Others swore they had been deceived. But all of them could not erase the sight burned into their minds. Marcus raised the jagged shard of scale he had torn from the predator's body, lifting it high above his head. His arm trembled from exhaustion, yet the gesture was steady and powerful. The crowd erupted into chaos, some shrieking in fear, others falling silent as the truth pressed down on them. Even the overseer could not hide the unease in his eyes. This was not the spectacle he had promised. This was not entertainment. This was a revelation that threatened the balance of fear his people had carefully maintained. The soldier let the shard fall into the sand and stepped down from the predator's body. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, leaving bloody footprints that trailed behind him. He did not look at the overseer, nor at the aliens who had mocked him before. He did not need to. His survival and his victory spoke louder than any words could. Every alien in the arena knew now that they had underestimated humanity, and that underestimation would haunt them. Whispers spread through the stands. Some spoke of legends they had heard of humans surviving on death worlds that no other species could endure. Others muttered about the resilience of Earth's soldiers, the stories that had always been dismissed as exaggeration. Now standing before them was proof. Humanity was dangerous not because of size or strength alone, but because of the will that drove them to fight long after others would have fallen. The overseer finally rose from his throne, his voice carrying through amplifiers as he declared that the spectacle was over, his tone sharp with anger. He tried to twist the moment, tried to claim that the predator's death was nothing more than chance, that the human survival was meaningless. But his words rang hollow. The crowd had seen the truth with their own eyes, and no speech could erase what had been burned into their memory. Marcus glanced back once, his expression hard and unyielding. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than the overseer's words. He had not fought for glory nor for spectacle. He had fought to survive, and in surviving he had shattered the lie that humanity was weak. The arena's gates creaked open, and he stepped through, his body battered but his head held high. Behind him lay the predator that had once been a symbol of fear, and before him stretched a future where the galaxy would never again look at humanity the same way. The human had stood victorious, and the echo of that victory would spread far beyond the walls of the arena. Fear of humanity. Echoes across the stars. The silence after Marcus left the arena was deafening. The gates closed behind him with a heavy echo that rang like the toll of a bell, marking the end of something far greater than a battle. It marked the end of an illusion, the shattering of a lie that the galaxy had clung to for generations. The overseer sat frozen on his throne, his skeletal frame rigid as he stared at the blood-soaked sand. Around him the crowd whispered and argued, their voices filled not with laughter but with unease. The predator, once their symbol of unstoppable power, was dead, and a single human had stood over its body as the victor. No amount of words could undo what they had seen. The story had already begun to spread, leaping from one tongue to another, carried on the whispers of fear. Marcus was led through narrow steel corridors, his body staggering with exhaustion, yet his eyes still burning with determination. Guards marched beside him, but even they no longer carried themselves with arrogance. They had mocked him when he was brought here, had laughed and called him prey, but now they avoided his gaze. They kept their distance as if afraid he might turn on them with the same fury he had unleashed upon the beast. The respect in their silence was unspoken but undeniable. At last he was taken to a holding chamber, its walls bare and its air heavy with the scent of rust. The guards closed the door behind him but did not jeer or taunt as they had before. Marcus lowered himself to the floor, his body finally giving in to the weight of exhaustion. Every muscle ached, his wounds burned, but he allowed himself only a moment of rest. He knew this was not the end. The galaxy would not forget what had happened here, and neither would its rulers. They would try to twist the truth, to bury the memory under lies, but the sight of their predator lying dead would never fade from those who had seen it. That image would travel far beyond this arena, carried like fire across the stars. Outside the chamber, the overseer convened with his council, his voice filled with anger as he demanded silence and secrecy. He ordered the spectators sworn to silence, threatened punishment for any who spread the tale. Yet he knew even as he spoke that it was futile. Stories could not be caged. Stories lived and breathed, and this one had been carved into the hearts of all who had witnessed it. By tomorrow, ships leaving the system would carry whispers of the human who had slain the apex predator. By the end of the week, entire sectors would know. By the end of the year, the whole galaxy would tremble with the knowledge. For centuries, humans had been dismissed, labeled as reckless, emotional, fragile. They had been underestimated by races who believed that survival required only technology, size, or brute strength. But Marcus's victory revealed the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was not physical might or advanced machines, but the unbreakable will that drove them to endure. They did not surrender to fear. They did not stop fighting until the fight was over. That truth was more terrifying to the galaxy than any beast. Marcus leaned back against the cold wall, his eyes closing for a moment as memories of the battle replayed in his mind. The roar of the predator, the sting of claws, the heat of blood, and finally the silence when the beast fell. He knew he would carry those moments forever, scars carved not only on his skin but on his soul. Yet he did not regret a single strike. He had fought for survival, but in doing so he had fought for something greater. He had fought for the name of humanity, and he had proven that humans were not to be mocked or dismissed. When the guards finally returned, their orders unclear even to themselves, they hesitated at the threshold. Some stared at him with wide eyes, unable to mask their unease. One even whispered under his breath that the soldier should not be kept alive, that he was too dangerous. But another, older and wiser, shook his head. Dangerous or not, the deed was done, and the galaxy already knew. Killing him now would not erase what had happened. The overseer might silence one man, but he could not silence the truth. As Marcus was marched once more through the corridors, whispers followed him like shadows. Some voices carried fear, others awe. He could feel the weight of their stares on his back, the shift in the air as those who had once mocked him now saw him for what he was. Not prey, not weak, but something entirely different, something they did not understand but instinctively feared. When the doors to the starport opened and the night sky stretched before him, Marcus lifted his head and took in the stars scattered across the void. They looked the same as they always had, but he knew the galaxy beyond them had changed forever. His fight in the arena was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a story that would ripple across civilizations. A story that would remind every species that humanity was not to be underestimated. He stepped onto the transport platform, his body battered but his spirit unbroken, and in that moment he carried more than his own survival. He carried the weight of a message that would outlive him. A message written in blood on the sand of an alien arena. The galaxy now knew what humans were capable of, and no amount of denial or fear could erase it. Far beyond, across distant systems, the whispers had already begun. They spoke of a human who had ripped an apex predator apart with his bare hands, who had stood victorious where no other had dared. They spoke of the soldier who proved that humanity was not prey but predator, a predator the galaxy had never prepared for. Fear spread faster than light, and in that fear was respect, grudging and heavy, but respect all the same. Marcus Hale walked away from the arena, leaving behind the corpse of the galaxy's greatest beast and the shattered pride of those who had mocked him. The echoes of his victory followed him into the night, and from that moment forward every star that shone above carried with it the truth. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was the force the galaxy had always feared but never admitted. The legend of fear. The galaxy would never be the same after that day. Across star systems and distant colonies, the story spread like fire through dry fields. It moved from the mouths of traders in docking bays to the hushed voices of soldiers gathered in barracks. From frightened politicians in their councils to the ordinary citizens who listened wide-eyed in disbelief. They spoke of the human soldier who had entered an alien arena unarmed, faced the galaxy's most feared predator, and walked away alive while the beast lay in pieces. Some told the story as a warning, others told it as a tale of awe, but every telling carried the same truth. Humanity was not what the galaxy believed it to be. For years, the great powers had seen Earth as reckless, their people as fragile creatures clinging to a dangerous world. They mocked humans for their stubbornness and emotions, treating them as curiosities rather than equals. Yet now the image of Marcus Hale standing over the carcass of the predator lived in their minds, etched there like a scar that would not fade. The whispers grew heavier, reshaped into questions the galaxy was not ready to answer. If one human soldier could do this, what could an army of them accomplish? What would happen if humanity ever turned its full strength against those who mocked them? Marcus himself did not seek glory. He sat quietly in the shadow of a transport ship, his body still aching, his arms wrapped in rough bandages. The battle had taken everything from him, but he knew it had also given something back. He had fought not only for his life but for the name of his people, and in doing so he had lit a flame that could not be extinguished. He thought of home, of the world that had forged him, a place where danger had always been part of life, where storms, predators, and hardships taught his kind the meaning of survival. Earth had made humanity resilient, and now the galaxy finally understood the cost of underestimating that resilience. In the alien halls, leaders debated in fear. Some demanded war before humanity could rise any further. Others whispered of alliances, but all of them carried unease in their hearts. None could erase the memory of that single battle. The overseer who had once laughed in arrogance now sat in silence, haunted by the vision of his champion torn apart. He knew the truth that every ruler would soon face. The galaxy had made a mistake. It had mistaken humanity for prey. As Marcus rose and walked into the starlit night, he carried no weapons, only the strength of his survival and the weight of a legend already taking root across countless worlds. He did not need to speak. His silence spoke louder than any words could. He had shown what humanity was, and the galaxy would never again look at his people without fear and respect. From that day forward, the story was no longer just his. It belonged to every human, a reminder that they were not weak, not fragile, not to be dismissed. They were survivors, fighters, predators in their own right. And as the stars stretched endlessly above, the legend of the soldier who ripped apart an apex predator like nothing echoed forever across the void. The end.